Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is the third in the series of email webinars. Today, we're going to be talking all about automation. Thank you to those of you who have been with us the whole way through since the beginning. This particular one is my most favorite thing to talk about, so I'm really excited to share this with you today. If you are new or if you are just joining us for this one and this is your first one, I'll introduce myself briefly. My name is Cece and I'm an arts marketer. I've been doing arts marketing for about 15 years. Email is one of my favorite things to talk about. So this is going to be a really exciting third portion of this email series. I have been an arts marketer as an in-house full-time employee at arts organization as a consultant, and now I work at an agency here in Cleveland called Form, and we only work with arts and culture and nonprofit organizations. So everything that I'm going to say today, I want to preface it by letting you know that all of this is through the lens that I have been you, and I have done all of these things myself previously, even as a department of one or as a department of one half. And I do this actively now for clients. So all of these things are doable. Also, if you start feeling a little bit overwhelmed, because I'm going to be sharing a lot of information with you, please know that there is no expectation for you to go back and implement every single thing we talk about right away, right? It's a step-by-step process. My hope is that you will just start with one small thing because moving forward is the right direction, right? As long as we're moving forward, we're doing good. So after this particular webinar, I hope that you will be able to take one thing and implement it in the short term. And then as you go along and you see the results and you get a little bit more comfortable, you'll be able to implement some additional things. All right, so let's get moving into this, this topic of automation. One of the things that excites me the most about doing this webinar is because we don't talk a lot about automation. We don't see a lot of professional development series just on email automation, but it is so important and it is such a great tool, not only to increase the efficacy of your email campaigns, but also to save you time. To save you time, you and your staff time and energy, right? Because if something can happen automatically and you don't have to do it manually, that's going to be good for everyone, right? So automation, I feel, is one of the most underutilized aspects of email marketing. And as we learned in a previous webinar in this series, email still has the highest ROI of any digital marketing activity you can do. And it's been like this since, mass emailing as we know it today was invented. Year over year, this data comes back. So it really behooves us to put a little bit of extra time and effort in to our email communications. And in this case with automation, a little bit more time and effort in at the beginning so we can set all of this stuff up so that when it runs and when it's going, we're getting the most out of it. So, of course, as I've started each one of these webinars, I want to reiterate the concept of relevance. Email is all about relevance. Actually, all communications are all about relevance. Our goal is to send the right message to the right person at the right time on the right channel. And automation in email is going to enable us to achieve this, right? It's going to enable us to send the right message to the right person, definitely at the right time. Because when we automate emails, the recipient of the email is not waiting for us to do something manually. Things are going to happen automatically so that we're communicating with them in a more timely manner. Also, it's still important to remember your communications ecosystem. Even with all this automation technology, which is super amazingly awesome, you still cannot look at email in its own bubble and in a vacuum. You also can't totally neglect your other channels. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But sort of for a very simple example, when we talk about automating a subscription renewal email, for example, that doesn't mean that you should all of a sudden stop sending the paper letter that your subscribers are used to receiving in the mail. these things are going to play off of each other and they're going to reinforce each other. So it's important to keep that in mind, that, you know, using automation for things like that is not automatically going to magically mean that you don't have to spend the money on postage immediately. Maybe down the road, as people get more and more used to receiving those emails and converting off of those emails, sure. But think of it as just one more thing in that communications ecosystem that you have to get those conversions. All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. So what is an automated email? Okay, so an automated email means a communication that is sent automatically in response to somebody's actions, right? So the recipient will take an action and that will trigger an email that will go out to them. And these actions could be a bunch of different things, and we'll talk about this, but it's in response to the recipient's action, not to your action, right? The recipient. And this is one of the main things in communications right now that is so important, is that our communication should be focused on the people receiving them, right? It's not about us, it's about them. And this is one of the great things about these automated emails, is it's not, you know, the email is not being sent when we have time to send that email out. It's when the recipient signs up for our list, let's say. That's their action that they're taking. And if we're sending an automated welcome email after they sign up for that list, it's in response to their action, not our action. So this is what's really important and what's great about automation. Before we talk about setting up the automations themselves, we have to talk about getting the data into your system properly. I know from previous webinars in this series that mostly we're dealing with, mostly you are using Constant Contact or MailChimp or something very similar in that zone. So, and of course, I can't give examples for every single email program out there. So the specific examples that I do have are for Constant Contact and MailChimp. However, after this webinar, if you have any questions specifically about how to do something, either with Constant Contact, MailChimp, or whatever other system you're using, please feel free to reach out to me. I know that Joe has shared my contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to answer any quick questions that I can. All right. In the last webinar, we talked about in the first one, excuse me, we talked about segmentation. So this is a little bit of a continuation of that segmentation discussion, right? This is taking it to the next step, because with automation, it is really important that the data goes in properly. Because if the data doesn't go into your MailChimp account, for example, properly, then you're not going to be able to run those automations because the criteria is not going to match up. So I want to start out with some specific examples, and I have both sides for MailChimp and Constant Contact here for you. So with what I have on the screen right now, some of you may be getting scared, but it's okay. It's okay. It's all going to be fine. I'm going to explain it. Okay. So with how most email software functions right now, the general rule is that you want to have one list with all of your patrons on it, or with everyone who's in that email software on it. Okay, let's let that sink in for a second. Okay, because traditionally, we're used to having multiple lists. Because originally, when the email software was invented, that's how everything was set up, right? It was by list. But in the past few years, additional functionality has come about that is necessary to enable us to send to the exact groups of people we want. So people who have specific criteria. And this is why, and this is a change. So if you still have a lot of lists that you're sending to, don't fret, you're not doing anything wrong. This is a change in the past couple of years. And even actually with MailChimp, some of this is even a little bit more recent than that, okay? So maybe, remember I talked in the beginning about maybe you just take one small thing from this webinar. Maybe this is the first thing that you do in the short term, is kind of reorganize how your lists work. And I'll be a little bit more specific about this in just a second. The reason why you want to have one main list is because now with most of the main providers, the segmentation is done using tags. And this is the same for MailChimp and Constant Contact. They both have something called tags. Now they function differently in both of these, kind of vastly differently. However, they both have them. You also have something called segments, which have been around for a while, which I hope that you have been using to narrow down and target your emails. But these things called tags are really important. The reason why is because rather than thinking of, let's take an individual person, for example, rather than thinking of that individual person being a member of list A, list B, or list C, right, kind of separate and discrete lists, think about that individual as having multiple attributes. So they have attribute A, B, and C. And the sort of corollary to this is probably with whatever ticketing CRM you're using, it is based on a constituent. So if you're using something like Donor Perfect, or maybe even Razor's Edge, or Ovation Ticks, or Patron Manager, any of these ticketing systems, you know that you can look in a ticketing or a donor account. So you can click on their name and go into their account and you can see their entire history. So the history that's attached to that individual. This is the same kind of thought, right? So in email, so one individual has, purchased tickets to the Nutcracker, donated to the 2018 annual appeal, and attended our gala in 2016, right? So these are the attributes. And this is why tags are important. Because rather than somebody being in multiple lists, people are all in one list and they have multiple tags. This is the way to segment because this allows us to very easily exclude and layer on tags. So this is a screenshot of how it's done in Constant Contact. So when you have those tags set up, you can narrow the recipients of your email, that's what they call it, using tags. And of course, this is a screenshot. I couldn't find a super great screenshot, but this is from their support documents, obviously. So you may not have these same tags in yours. In fact, you probably won't. The tags that you might have are, various show names or event names, maybe membership or subscription, things that identify that person as being a subscriber or a ticket buyer to a particular show. Right? You can filter by that. This is how you do it in MailChimp. To be honest, I don't like to recommend necessarily one particular system for anybody ever because everybody has different needs. Everybody's organization wants to do different things. But I will say that especially with automation, MailChimp's functionalities are just light years ahead of anything else in its same zone or price level. So some of the things, and I will qualify things later, you have to do some of these things that we're going to talk about in terms of automation differently in Constant Contact and MailChimp, and oftentimes MailChimp is a heck of a lot easier. Back to this. So this is how MailChimp does it, right? So you can see you can layer on these tags. So here in this example, this is from a real live nonprofit that I work with. So this is, I'm trying to reach people who have not attended in a while. So you can see here that I'm using the and or targeting. I can say, I want to send this to people who their last attendance date is before July 1st, but they are not tagged as a member, right? Because if we think back to that very first webinar in this series about segmentation, it's all about kind of layering these targeting aspects on. Because if I'm trying to reactivate people, get people to come back after they haven't attended in a while, I probably don't want to send that same message to members because they're a little bit of a different group of people. I might send a different message to members. And this is why tags are important, because you can tag people based on their attributes. The next thing that we need to talk about is making sure that you have all of the information in that you might want to use in an automation. You notice here how I have attendance date is before July 1st. That requires me to have loaded in the attendance dates for everyone into the system while I'm loading in importing in that email list. This brings up another kind of important thing. If you're loading in emails from your ticketing system, donor system, make sure that you're not just loading in the email address only, right? At the very least, you probably want to have first name, last name. If you are serving a larger geographic area, probably city, state, zip code as well, because you may have something that you want to send to people who are very close to a venue location, and it may be a different version for people that are further away. You definitely want to be able to load in other attributes. Are you collecting birthdays, for example? Maybe you want to send some emails out around people's birthdays. Anything that you want to be able to use in a segmentation later, you got to make sure it goes in first, or it's not going to be in there. So you're not going to be able to use it. And we'll talk about this. I have some examples that show this a little bit more specifically in a bit. I wanted to talk very specifically about automations, email automations that I think you should be using now, that your organization should be using now. Because we could talk about how to automate things, and I could go through an entire tutorial for you, but I want to leave you with some very concrete things that you can do now and just kind of say, these are the important things, or these are the things that I think are important. So the first type of automation that you 100% should be using now is a welcome email. So when somebody signs up for your email list, sending an automated welcome email. And there's tons of data out there that shows how effective welcome emails are, right? And this is just one particular stat, right? But welcome emails generally have a super high open and click rate. And that's ultimately what you want, right? As we talked about before, the entire purpose of an email is not to give everyone your life story, but it's to provide just enough compelling information that is going to cause people to click and go to your website to learn more, right? You want people to take an action. You want people to engage with these email communications. And welcome emails are a really great way to do that. I have an example here from Four Freedoms Park. And this is their welcome email that they send out after somebody subscribes to their list. You can see it might be a little small. My apologies. I had to break it up into 2 columns because it was a little bit long. So the left is the first part, and then the right is after you scroll down a little bit. But you can see that they're welcoming people for signing up for the list, and then they're also right away giving people the opportunity to engage. So with the first thing on the left, they're saying, here's upcoming events, here's our social media, here's more about the park. So make sure that when you're sending out that welcome email, yes, you want to say welcome. You don't want it to be a super hard sell, right? Because you don't want to appear to be skeevy, but you do want to provide the opportunity for people to engage. You also have to think about where that sign up comes from, because you may want to have slightly different welcome emails for that. Right? Sure, your website, your social media, if you've got a sign up form or you're putting links for people to sign up on those platforms, that may be a similar welcome email. But if you're adding someone to the list because they participated in a raffle or a contest, for example, that might necessitate a slightly different welcome email. And you can set all these things up and have the different welcome emails be triggered by different forms, right? You can also have specific welcome emails if you're adding somebody manually, right? You can do it, especially with MailChimp. It's super easy to say, I want to send this automation based on, if I added them manually or if they simply signed up through one of my sign up forms. But you definitely want to think about where that comes from in terms of segmenting your messaging so that when someone signs up, that welcome email is relevant, right, to where they've come from. So with each one of these automated emails, I have a little slide for the criteria that would trigger said email. So for the welcome email, the trigger would be that their email address comes from a sign up form or a manual ad from an upload or something that you are doing in the system. So when that action happens, it's going to then trigger this automated email to go out. Oh, I forgot to mention, that's the end of kind of the first little section. If you have any questions going through, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat kind of after each little section. And then of course, we'll have a lot of time for Q&A afterwards, because I know this is a really interesting subject for everyone. But please feel free to put something in the chat. I don't want to move too fast. And I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Just like with every time I do a webinar or a session, there are no stupid questions. This is a safe space. If you have a question, odds are somebody else has the same question. So please don't be afraid to ask. All right, the second automation that I recommend is a post-event or post-attendance email. And I know we have, some different types of organizations on the webinar. So that's why I'm kind of separating out event or attendance, right? So if you're a museum or something like that, this might mean an attendance. If you're a performing arts organization, this might mean, after an event that you have. Post-event or post-attendance emails, this provides you with another opportunity to connect with them. Maybe you do a survey. Automating that email is the easiest thing in the world, right? You don't have to manually send that thing out on the Monday morning after the weekend of the shows, right? Pre-setting up that email and having it automated where it's automatically going out to people is super simple. If you're dealing with an attendance that has a date with it, remember that email that I showed earlier, that MailChimp example that I showed earlier, where if you're loading your attendance date in your system, then you're able to send rolling automated emails based off of that date, right? So if you're saying, I want to send an email to people who have attended before a certain date, it can automatically do that on a rolling basis. Or if you are doing it as, I want to send this to people whose last attendance date is more than 30 days prior, then that's going to be rolling, right? Because if somebody came on March 1st, for example, 30 days later, they're going to get an email. The next person who attended on March 2nd, 30 days from that, they're going to get an email. So again, it's based on the recipient action, not your action, which makes things a lot more relevant. This additional opportunity for engagement can give you a lot of really great stuff. Not only can you put in a timely manner things that are going on, but you can also talk to the recipient in the most relevant way. You can say, hey, we noticed that we haven't seen you in a while. We would love it if you came back. And I have an example, I have an example of this. This is Great Lakes Science Center, which is here in Cleveland. And this is a post-event or a post-attendance email that they send out that is automated based on the date of attendance. And there's not necessarily a hard sell here. It doesn't say, come back today. But what one of their identified outcomes is that they really want to increase the number of people posting on social media about their experience at the Science Center. And we talked about that in the first webinar, is that we have to always be concerned about outcomes with each communication we send out. So the Science Center identified that they really want to increase user-generated content, right? Because UGC is one of the best marketing tools, right? It's like the digital version of word-of-mouth marketing. So this is their post-attendance email where they're thanking them, obviously, but they're telling them, share your photo on these social media platforms using this hashtag. And when people do that, periodically they'll go through and they'll actually reshare visitors' photos on social media, which is always fun. Down below, which I couldn't fit in the screenshot, they also have a coupon for a pop. You can get a free pop at the cafe at the Science Center. So that's an extra little thing that they do. You could also, depending on what your schedule is and what your upcoming events are, you could always offer a coupon or a discount for an upcoming event, certainly. And keeping in mind what that outcome is and who is receiving this. All right, I'm going to stop. We have 3 things in the chat here. So let me, hang on a second. Let me look in the chat. Okay, so we have a lot of questions. Okay. Hang on 1 second. Let's stop. And for the people who are listening to this on the recording later, hello, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and read the questions just so that you can know what people are asking. So the first question is, what if you have multiple events with separate attendee lists on the same day? Then in that case, you would need to make sure you're loading in that criteria as well. So rather than just the attendance date, you would also base this automation off of the show or the event that they attended. So you would just layer that on to the date. In this example here, I mean, this is the Science Center. So if somebody's just, buying a ticket to enter the museum, it's totally date driven. But you would also add in the criteria of the event as well. So somebody that came to event A, right, on this particular date, that's the criteria you would use, right? Let's see here. And then, yes, and that would work rolling, because if you're using the date, if you have the same named events that are on different dates, you would want to put in the date criteria, right? So somebody who attended, I don't know, Carmen on August 5th, right? If you're doing, then you would want to use both of those together. All right. And also, there's a question, how would that be different from simply scheduling in advance? Because when you're using the automation, when you have repeated behavior in terms of event attendance or, event attendance or venue attendance, you're able to set up those automations to do it in a rolling way. Now, not everyone may have this all the time, right? I'm kind of trying to generalize a little bit because I know we have different types of organizations on this webinar. Okay, I think that's all the questions for right now. Let me wait just 1 more second in case anybody has any other questions about the post event or the post attendance. Certainly, if it's just one specific event that you're sending it out, yes, you could just simply schedule in advance. But if you've got things that are date driven, you probably want to automate those. Okay, I am going to close my chat window, but please keep doing that. Those were great questions. Oh, 1 more question. Hang on. Let's see. Oh, Rick. Hello, Rick. Rick is asking for where the hyperlinks go in this particular example. In this example, because this is MailChimp, this example is actually opening up the social share function. So it's going to open up. So if they click on Twitter, if they have the Twitter app, let's say on their phone, it's going to open up the Twitter app for them to immediately post, right? Because Facebook has that option, MailChimp has that option. If your email program does not have that option, you can just Google that, and there's a little way that you can edit the URL to make it do that, and it will give you that formula to do that. So we know that for the Great Lakes Science Center in particular, they have a lot of traffic coming from mobile devices. And this makes sense because, the people who are going to go to the Science Center are likely, parents with kids, right? And so they're not sitting in front of a computer all day. They're on their mobile device. So they're probably going to read this. And we know from the data that they're reading emails on their mobile device. So that's why we set it up where it's automatically going to open the recipient's Twitter account to make it as easy and seamless as possible for them to achieve the outcome that we have identified, which is sharing photos about their experience at the Science Center. If they're opening it on their phone, they probably have the photo that they took on their phone. So it makes it all the more easy for them to achieve that outcome and share that. There's a question. It will open the orgs page. No, it will open the attendees page or app so that they can share specifically directly to their social media, right? Because the point with user-generated content is not to post stuff on the organization's page. It's for people to post stuff on their own social media, right? Yeah. Okay. All right, let's move on. There's going to be lots more time for questions, but please feel free to keep asking those questions in the chat because that was actually really, really great so that we could not move too fast here. All right, so as we just talked about, right, the basic criteria here in this one is their ticket buyer status or their attendee status. So are they an attendee, right? And the date of the attendance, so there's some sort of date driven. And as we just talked about, perhaps there's also an event criteria loaded in there, depending on how your organization works. Okay, the next automation is membership or subscription renewals. Hopefully, we all send membership and subscription renewal notices via email in addition to probably print as well. And hopefully, and you know, this isn't necessarily related to email, but this is all part of that ecosystem. If you're doing subscription or member renewals, don't forget to add in a little bit of Facebook in there. You can load in as a custom audience your list of subscribers. And when you load that subscriber list in, you can target specific content to that group in particular. So then they're receiving the emails, they're receiving maybe that print letter that they get in the mail, but then they're also receiving a reinforcement on social media. So that's using 3 of the channels in that ecosystem, which can only help in reinforcing that messaging. So membership or subscription news. Membership, if you have a membership that expires on a rolling basis. So for example, if somebody joins your organization on June 5th, that membership expires in a year on the next June 5th, then you absolutely want to automate that renewal because then you can start those emails based on that date so that it will always be relevant to the person who's receiving it. If you have subscriptions, you may have a subscription renewal deadline, right? Like one particular date. You can still create an automated email series based on those dates, right? So you don't have to keep doing it manually. So this is an example of a straight membership. And this is an organization here in Cleveland called the City Club. And their memberships expire on a rolling basis, right? So this email goes out 30 days prior to the membership expiration date. So we can say, hey, your membership is going to expire, right? And that's based on the specific date. Another reason why, if you do have this, you want to make sure that you're loading in that membership expiration date so that you can send the automation based on it. And you can see how, of course, this is a preview of this email. You know, we see how we have some custom fields in here. So we have the first name in here. If you look a little bit down lower where it says test membership expiration date, that's going to be the actual expiration date that's loaded into the system. So we can say, you know, this is the actual date that your membership is going to expire. We're going to look at this a little bit on the surface level, and then we're going to go one level deeper because I know that probably every single person on this webinar has either a membership or a subscription that we're dealing with. So I want to spend a little bit more time on this. And having an automation for this, I think, can save you the most time, right? So when you're doing these types of automated emails, you can do them as a series, which I think is important. So you can do them as a, let's say if it's a straight renewal, like a subscription renewal, when the renewal on sale date, then maybe 30 days prior to deadline, 1 day prior to deadline, 30 days after. And then again, if you do a single ticket on sale, again, sometime prior to the single ticket on sale to let subscribers know, hey, if you do not renew your subscription, you may not be able to get those seats because they're going to be released and other people can get them, right? So this is kind of the straight subscription version of this. Obviously, the membership version of this with a rolling date would be maybe 30 days out from when their membership expires, maybe a day out from the expiration, and maybe 30 days after the expiration to remind them. The important thing to remember here, and with any automation, is that you have to keep putting in new and updated data. And if your ticketing or donor or a fundraising CRM does not directly talk to your email marketing software, that's okay. It happens all the time. You will need to download and upload lists periodically to make sure that these automations are running correctly. For example, if you've got this automated series for subscription renewals, you want to make sure that you're loading in the current season subscribers, so the people who have renewed and have purchased a ticket, into the system. Because once you load them in, let's say John Smith was on your subscribers last year, but not this year, right? And about halfway through this email automation, he renews his subscription. So how the automation will handle that is once his criteria doesn't match the automation criteria anymore, then the automation criteria would be that people who subscribed last year but are not a subscriber this year. Once that doesn't match, he's going to be pulled out of that automation. So he's no longer going to receive any of those emails to renew the subscription because he already has. I know that was a lot to take in. So what that means, just one more time, is that making sure that you are loading in updated information, subscriber information, is going to make sure that this automation runs properly without you having to manually pull lists all the time for this and load them in as separate lists. All you're doing is loading in the people who are 2019 subscribers, or I guess at this point it would be, well, no, still 2019 maybe, or 2020 subscribers, because you already have your list of 2019 subscribers in there. And that's how you're doing that automation. And people are tagged as such. Okay. So the criteria for this one is going to be the subscription year and then their ticket buyer status, right? So that they are a subscriber. Or if it's a membership, so the criteria would be their membership, the fact that they are a member, so their membership status, they are a member, and then something about the date, right? The date of the membership expiration. Okay, and I saw we have some questions here. All right. Rick is asking, I think that only works with paid MailChimp. To do an email series, yes, it has to be the paid version of MailChimp. Of course, with Constant Contact, you have to pay no matter what. But with MailChimp, it has to be the paid version. But it's worth it. I feel it's worth it to do the paid version if you are doing this kind of memberships or subscriptions. It's worth it to get the paid version. So another question, we have subscribers to our annual campaign who give a check, who contribute through Power to Give, and who go directly to the website. Is this too many acknowledgements? Well, you definitely have to choose. There is definitely a difference between an acknowledgement, which is a transactional email, and this type of more kind of marketing communications email, right? So when somebody donates, they're going to get a transactional email that says, hey, thank you for your donation in XYZ amount. You know, you can use this for tax purposes, whatever else your copy is there, your messaging. But these are going to be, you know, hey, you last donated on this date. Would you consider renewing your donation because now it's been a year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, but that's a good point, is that you want to make sure that if you're using multiple systems that are sending out emails, that they're not overlapping, right? So that it's very clear, the delineation, what might be a transactional email and what might be an email like we're talking about here. Okay, any other questions before we move on? I'll wait one more second. The big thing to remember here is that you will need to figure out the best way to load in your data and segment it so that you can make these things possible. And I wish I could tell you there was one way, but there isn't, because everyone's organization is so different, right? Whether you have memberships, subscriptions, whether your memberships all renew on the same day per year, whether they're on a rolling basis, you know, how your schedule works when things go on sale. There's so many different variables. If you would like my quick opinion or advice about how your organization might do it, please feel free to give me a call. I'm happy to help you.
Cece, it's Joe. Hi.
Hi, Joe. Hi.
Can you quickly just run through again something that I think some people need clarity on when they talk to me a lot of the times are the different ways those triggers are going to be made? Because it's really easy when it's something that's going into MailChimp, right? Like if you want to have something auto-generate when someone subscribes to your list, like that's very easy. But maybe having something that triggers earlier, can you just go over that one more time? I feel like sometimes people get really confused about when you say like the criteria about when it triggers and exactly what's triggering it. So like, is it automatically triggering when I upload a new list? Is it automatically triggering when someone goes to the tab, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and actually I have a couple slides for that in a minute.
Oh, beautiful. Never mind. Getting
Yes, I know. It's because we like, I swear to God, we like our brains think the same way.
Yeah, great.
Hang on. Okay, so I have one more type of automated email that I highly recommend that you send out, that you just set to run, right? And that would be a sort of lapsed member, visitor, ticket buyer email. Because reactivation campaigns, and we talked about those a little bit, can be really helpful in getting people to engage again if they haven't been to you in a while, if they haven't visited you in a while. Now, you can do a straight reactivation campaign just based on email behavior. You know, so if somebody hasn't opened your emails in a while, you can just do it based on that criteria. And those type of campaigns really actually work quite well. I just did one for an organization, a relatively small organization. You know, we're not talking a ton of people. And we sent it to people, and this is a theater, and we sent it to people who had not bought a ticket, or no, who had not opened any email from them. And I think it was a year. And that one reactivation email, and they happened to have some holiday shows coming up. So shows with kind of mass appeal. And so we sent them an email that was specifically about the holiday shows. And based off of that one send, just to that particular segment, we got over 1,000 opens to that. And so don't forget about those just kind of straight email reactivation campaigns, because you can definitely get some engagement off of those. Yes, if people have not opened your emails for the past 2 years, you send a reactivation campaign, they still didn't open it. Okay, you can kind of be sure that they're either not interested or it's not a valid email address. Okay, but it doesn't hurt to try to see how many you might be able to get off of a campaign like that. And this is very similar in that, you know, it's a reactivation for people who haven't visited you in a while or haven't bought a ticket. And this is, again, comes back to make sure you are loading in this information about and it could be a combination of, you know, their status. Are they a member? Were they just a visitor? Are they a ticket buyer? You know, the date that they last came, the date that their membership expired. So let's say you sent that membership expired email series, but they didn't ever renew their membership, right? Then they can be put in a bucket of unrenewed members and receive some additional communications down the line, right? Not, and of course, not necessarily communications that simply say, renew your membership, right? Probably other stuff that's going to show them the value of that membership. So these, when you automate them, you can set them to be rolling, right? So every time, if you have a date criteria in there and you have events that are happening, you know, you can set that date criteria to be before a certain calendar date, you know, a certain period of time before, you know, the last event that occurred. There's all kinds of different ways that you can set to trigger that. And you can also do things like exclude. So in that very first example that I gave, where we were sending it to people who had attended prior to a certain date, but who were not a member, you also have to remember that too, because that might be a slightly different segment that you're going to speak to in a different way. And letting these just set and send is going to save you a lot of time versus doing them manually every single time. And you're just going to let it run. One thing that I should mention or talk about when we're talking about email automation series is that generally you see the open rates decrease as the emails go out in that series. So the highest open rates and the highest engagement rates are going to happen with the first email in the series. That's generally what will happen. That's industry-wide and arts and nonprofit industry-wide. And then you're going to see them kind of go down with each email. So definitely make sure to have your strongest messaging, your strongest value proposition in that first email, because that's the thing that people are most likely going to open and engage with. When we're talking about email series, unless it's over a particularly long period of time, which you can, like that example I gave about the subscriptions, you know, subscription on sale, you know, before the deadline, after the deadline, prior to single ticket on sale. If you're like most organizations, that's a period of a lot of months usually. You know, maybe your subscriptions go on sale in February, but your single tickets go on sale in September. So you can have, you know, 3, 4 emails in that series, 5 emails in that series, because it's over a length of time. If you're doing a membership renewal that's sort of, you know, 30 days before, a day before, 30 days after, I would probably say that maybe 3 emails might be the limit for you, because you don't want to bombard, right? Because if people are not highly engaged enough to renew kind of right away, then you don't want to, yes, you want give them another reminder, but you don't want them to feel like you're bombarding them, because then that might actually cause them to feel negatively and they don't renew. Because of that, we talked about how, you know, negative email practices can actually make people stop doing business with an organization, and we don't want to sort of cross over into that line. So when you're sending these automated emails, just make sure it's applicable in terms of timing. So with these ones, it would be this, you know, the date of the last attendance, the date of the last ticket purchase, plus their status, so that they purchased tickets for that particular thing, and maybe excluding out if they are also a lapsed subscriber or a member or any other group that you would want to speak to in a different way in terms of segmentation. All right, so now I'm going to get a little bit into the nitty gritty and kind of address Joe's question. And I am going to talk about Constant Contact and MailChimp specifically, just because I know that we've got a large number of users here. So how to actually do these triggers is going to differ with these two systems. But again, I will reiterate this. It's really important to make sure that you're loading your data in properly, and that you're taking into consideration that you're loading in all of the information that you would want to use in that automation, right? Because if you're not loading in the attendance date, you're not going to be able to use it in the automation later or in any email later because it's not in the system, right? So with MailChimp is easier. I will say that. What you need to do is load in your data regularly, and the automation will run itself off of tags and off of the combination of tags. Here's an example. So, and I'll give you a specific example for this particular workflow. This is Great Lakes Science Center again, and I use this example because they have a lot of members and they have a lot of attendances and things like that. But you can absolutely extrapolate from this and use for subscribers and or visitors or anything like that. So this is their membership expires on email screenshot. So you can see that with this particular automation, the trigger is 30 days prior to the membership expires on date. So we actually have that date field loaded in as a date. Oh, that's a really important thing. With MailChimp, if you're using any sorts of dates, when you load in your CSV file, that field has to be set as a date in Excel in the CSV. And then when you load it into MailChimp, you have to identify that that is a date field. Otherwise, MailChimp will simply read it as a series of numbers. So that is one thing that you have to be very careful of. So you can see here, so the trigger is 30 days prior to the membership expires on date, which is a field that we've got in there. We're loading that in there. And then we also want to make sure that it's only going to people who are also tagged members. So when we load, and this is a manual process, this particular organization, their systems don't necessarily talk to each other. So the reliable way of getting this information into MailChimp is a manual export-import process. So when these folks are loaded in to MailChimp, they are also being tagged as members, because they, you can use that in all kinds of other formations as well. So we're just double checking here that yes, if they are a member, they should have if they have that membership expires on column, they should automatically be a member, but we're just making sure. I just like to be like doubly sure. So they have to be tagged a member. So if people do not fit that criteria, they're not going to be put in this automation. And let me tell you a little bit about the export-import procedure that we identified for this particular organization. So prior to us kind of redoing their email, they were using Constant Contact, and they were running a query in, it may have been Razor's Edge, or they have another system that they use for gate sales, people who just walk up and buy a ticket. They were manually doing queries and saying, I want people who, and they were doing their membership renewals monthly. So they were running a manual query to spit out a list. Like, I want people whose membership expiration dates are within, this month, right? Who have not yet renewed. Exporting that individually, importing that into Constant Contact, and then manually sending an email to that group. With doing it this way in MailChimp and setting up an automation, all they do is weekly, they export just the member list for that particular, whoever is a member at that moment in time, including their membership expiration date, and they simply load that in to MailChimp, which will automatically update all the records that are existing in MailChimp. So if somebody now, if their membership expiration date does not meet this criteria, they're going to be kicked out of this automation automatically, right? So if their membership expiration date is not coming up in 30 days, they're not going to be in this automation. If somebody receives this email and then renews the next day, they're going to be kicked out of this automation automatically because they no longer meet the criteria for the next email in this series. which is based off of the same criteria. Okay, we have a question. Okay, so can you copy and the question is, can you copy and paste a date field, or do you have to load it in as a CSV for it to read as the date to trigger an automation email? I would load it in as a CSV. I think you can copy it because you can still identify that it's a date field in the custom field with MailChimp, but I'm not sure that it would necessarily render all the time, because it being a date field in the CSV is what's going to allow MailChimp to see it as a date. So I would do it as a CSV. I would load people into MailChimp as a CSV just in general, because it's just cleaner. Any other questions about all the things that I just said, which are a lot of things? Let me move on to the constant contact version of this, okay, because it is slightly different. So in MailChimp, because the automation is just going to it's going to keep running and running and running based on these criteria, you don't have to worry about sending emails specifically to get it going. The automation is going to trigger based on the data that's being loaded in, right? And this is where MailChimp is easier. Constant contact. You have to send an initial email, and then the automation starts from that. Okay, so it is a little bit more, it has a little bit more of a manual aspect to it. So when you're in your constant contact and you're starting an automated campaign, right, you select the trigger for that. So it's, I'm sending this email out, and if they open the email, if they click a certain link in that email, then they're going to be put on this automation, right? So you do have to do it a little bit more manually. That said, if you're using constant contact and you're just doing a straight subscription, right, this could be okay, because your subscription deadline is a finite date. It's not a rolling date. So you could always do it that way, and that would be fine. Okay, so no, I'm not saying that everybody should switch over to MailChimp right away, but you can kind of see how it's a little bit easier in MailChimp. The other thing to remember about automations, and I'm talking about this while we're looking at the constant contact, because it's a little bit more obvious, but you can also do this in MailChimp, is you can also send automations by a link click. So let's say you're sending out an email with a CTA button to buy tickets for a particular show. So you can say, I want to send an automation to everyone who has clicked on that link, because that shows interest in buying tickets to that show. So they're going to be put on a little automation path. That's actually one of my favorite ways for just a straight sort of ticket sale automation. You know, if you're coming up on a show, and, you know, normally what you would do, and we talked about this in the segmentation webinar, when we were talking about sending follow-up emails versus just sending out the same email over and over again to the same group trying to sell a show, you can automate that entire thing. So you can say, I've sent out this quote unquote sales email for a Christmas Carol, right? We're coming up on the holiday season, for a Christmas Carol. If somebody clicks on that CTA button, that means that they're engaged with that email, that there's a level of interest. So I'm going to set up maybe an additional 2 email automation for people who specifically clicked on that link, but who have not yet bought tickets, and you can put that in the criteria, so that they're just automatically going to send things, rather than me having to manually identify who clicked on that email, put them over into another segment, manually send those all an email, look at the next one, send them all an email, right? You can automate this whole thing, which saves you time. All right, so we have some questions. So Rick asks, we take our list and convert it to a CSV, reconfigure and add things like the date of subscription, then reload it into the MailChimp audience. So it doesn't have to be that complicated. So you don't necessarily have to reconfigure. If you're pulling out your list in its entirety, it should have all of this information already in it, right? It should have their attributes in it, their date of their subscription, or the date of the, or the last performance they attended, right? The only thing that you have to make sure if you're doing a date-driven automation is that that date column is formatted as a date. That's the only thing that you really need to kind of do on the front end of that. And it takes, you know, I mean, it takes all of 2 seconds to do that. So the next question is, can you cancel the Eventbrite registration email in favor of an automated MailChimp email from the organization? So Eventbrite does connect to MailChimp, where it will load people into MailChimp. To be honest with you, I would have to check to see if you can turn off MailChimp's transactional emails. And that's that difference there between a transactional email and a marketing email, communications email, right? When somebody purchases through Eventbrite, their sort of receipt and ticket, that's going to be a transactional email, which is something a little bit different than what I'm talking about here. Okay.
Cece, we actually do this. It's best to let Eventbrite still send the ticket and the like, thank you for purchasing email,
Right.
but that automated. But you can turn off the reminder emails for
Right.
people, and you can automate that in MailChimp, and that's really easy
Right.
with Eventbrite. You just go to the email tab, and you can turn that off, and then because you've loaded them in through the connection between Eventbrite, you have them tagged, and you can set an automatic email to go through your MailChimp that's more customized for like the reminder that it's coming up, et cetera, and you can tell them to look for the Eventbrite ticket in their email, et cetera.
Right. Yep. Fantastic. Yep. Okay. That was a lot of stuff. And of course, there are many, many gradations of all this and many, many different configurations that you can achieve. Does anybody have like a real life sort of case that you want to share where you might want to know how you would set it up for your particular organization? You can go ahead and put it in the chat.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. I know.
While people are thinking, something that I think is really important just to double down on is these automated emails, like when Cece was talking about subscription renewals and those sorts of things, are great if you are having somebody else on your team or even you uploading new people and new things so that you don't have to worry about sending the actual email. So if you have rolling subscriptions, or even if you only have one subscription date and you have it all set up, you know, you have tags for when people do things, all of those are going to send automatically. So you're just having people upload information, and then you're only teaching them how to do one piece, and then somebody else can be the master of creating emails, organizing them, seeing what's happening. And it allows you to sometimes delegate duties that, you know, you end up like, oh my God, I'm in constant contact, or I'm in MailChimp all the time. But I can have somebody who's a coordinator or somebody else from another department or somebody who's an intern uploading this data, and then I'm just checking to make sure things are right and they're running. It can be a great time saver, and it can also be a great way, you know, to make sure that, say, everything that comes out of MailChimp goes through the communications and marketing person, but a lot of people in fundraising and development might be loading information into the system, and you're just making sure that's happening. So I think that's something else, another aspect of this automation that's really exciting for me, that I wanted to double down on. But it looks like you may have got something.
Yeah. That's excellent. There's an additional question here about we are bilingual English-Spanish for some campaigns, and even the salutation is impossible, much less the footer legalese. Well, if you are bilingual, how are you identifying who is receiving the English and who is receiving the Spanish? Because those are two separate segments right there. which should be tagged as such if someone is to get the Spanish version or the English version.
I've never done this, Cece. Do you know, is there a
Oh.
setting in MailChimp for language?
You know, I'd have to look.
I don't know. I've never done it.
Because it's not gonna translate it automatically for you, so you would just be creating separate emails, and as long as you have it tagged for what language people are going to want to receive it in, then you would just do it like that. So somebody who is tagged Spanish would get the Spanish version. Somebody who's tagged English would get the English version. That would be a unique tag to your particular organization that other organizations may not have. Through Eventbrite in Spanish, they're identified in MailChimp. Yes. So if they're identified as that they've received a Spanish language campaign, then that's how you would do that segmentation. Yeah. Then you would do that based on, you would have a separate email in Spanish, a separate email in English, and send the automations based off of those tags. So that would be your tag. Another criteria here, let's say if you're using MailChimp, so this particular automation goes out to people who have this criteria plus Spanish language, for example. Any other questions? Hey, Joe, since there's a relatively small-ish number of people, I mean, if anybody just wants to verbalize and unmute themselves, their question.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Brittany, do you want to unmute everyone?
Sure.
Oh, another question about the Spanish. With the salutation, señor or señora, also if we do the email in Spanish, I like for the whole thing to be in Spanish, including the legalese. Well, you would just have to make it in Spanish. So you would have to translate it or have somebody translate it for you. And in order to do the salutation, of course, you would need to have a salutation field loaded in that's going to pull that salutation in, just like you would pull in a Mr. or Mrs.
Great. Yeah, I think I did a quick Google search too. I think you can actually set the language of the email from the beginning, because MailChimp has multiple languages for that, like footer section, the unsubscribe, that thing. I mean, you'd have to build your own salutation and build the email in Spanish. But I think the autofill MailChimp sections, that may only be on the paid subscription, because you may have to pick a primary language, but I do know they have more than one.
And the question again is in MailChimp Free. MailChimp Free at this point in time is quite limited in its functionality. A few months ago, they sort of revamped the free version. So in the free version of MailChimp, you can send an automated email, but it can only be one email. You can't do a series. So there's a lot of functionality that is not available in MailChimp Free. And again, even if you are a small organization, I highly recommend that you get the paid version of MailChimp. The lower end paid versions will still unlock a lot of functionality that's going to be so useful for you. Because right now I feel that the MailChimp Free can sometimes be limiting, even for a small organization. So please do not be afraid to pay for that, because the benefits are going to be totally worth it. And if you've ever heard me do a webinar before or speak at a conference, you know that I love free resources, right? Because if you can get something for free, that's of course the best. And I am not the type of person that is going to tell you to just spend money willy-nilly. However, in this particular case, because email is so gosh darn effective, I really do recommend paying for your service and not using the free version because of the functionality that you're going to get.
So if you were going to say like 3 automated emails that every organization should consider, what would your top 3 things, kind of just as an overview takeaway, be?
Well, yeah. So these are the ones that we went through here. So we'll go through them again. So the first one would be the welcome email. Everybody should be sending out a welcome email. You can do that in MailChimp Free. Everybody should be sending out a welcome email of some sort, right? The second one is some sort of post-event or post-attendance email should be going out. Whether because of how your organization is set up, whether that's like an automation that goes out or whether it is just something that you send manually because your events are very finite, some sort of post-event or attendance email should be going out with a thank you for visiting, thank you for attending. That could also have, if you do a survey, that can have that survey in it. If you want to provide a coupon or a discount or some sort of offer for their next attendance, if that's applicable, do that. And then this last one, which renewals. You should definitely be automating renewal communications, because we all know that the renewal process, whether it's for a membership or a subscription, that's usually a longer process, right? And it's going to save you a ton of time if you automate those things. Also, keep in mind, remember the overall fact is that it takes a lot less money to retain a patron than it does to get a new patron. So spending the time to send a renewal automation and working that out so that you can talk to your members in a relevant way and talk to your subscribers in a relevant way to get them to renew is going to be a lot cheaper than trying to get a new subscriber to replace them or a new member to replace them. Any other questions that anybody wants to unmute themselves and say hi?
Hi, Cece.
Hi.
This is Rick.
Hi, Rick.
I do have a question. And let me just explain to everybody the background of this question so that they'll know. Last night, in fact, I just sent out post-event emails. They weren't automated because I didn't know to do it yet. Now I do. But this was a post-event of one of our bilingual events. And so I have a segment on my audience, on my MailChimp audience, that came from Spanish language Eventbrite registrations. And so my problem, the email that I sent out last night to these Spanish language folks looks fine, except that I could not do the Spanish equivalent of Dear Juan or Dear Maria, because in Spanish you say querido or querida, so that's gender specific. And so the question is whether or not MailChimp either in its free version, which I'm using now, which I'll upgrade as soon as I get off the phone with you, is MailChimp capable of seeing that if I put into the CSV another field, male or female, or a gender field. Then the other thing is I could not find the place where you go to translate. I could translate some of the information in the footer, like stuff like, do you want to change the way you receive these emails? You can update your subscription or you can unsubscribe. I got all that translated into Spanish. But there was stuff like the copyright and, we're required by law to do blah, 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 and all that I couldn't find any way to translate that into Spanish. So unfortunately, on the footer of this email that I sent out to all my Spanish speaking members was in English. That's a kind of a minor thing, but I don't know if there's really any way to fix that even on a paid version of MailChimp.
Well, I think you'd have to do a little bit of a workaround. So if you've got that segment of Spanish speakers already in your MailChimp, the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to tag them as well as being Spanish speakers, because you're probably going to want to exclude them or include them, at least know who they are when you're segmenting by tag in MailChimp. So I would do that first. I think because of the because of the male and female speech, parts of speech in Spanish, I think you probably will have to create an extra salutation field, because MailChimp, nor is any other program, going to necessarily seamlessly be able to identify male or female just by a name. So you probably will have to, if you wanted to do that and not use just first name, if you wanted it to be more formal, I think you would have to, in your spreadsheet or in each person's record, actually put in manually. Well, and then there's the other thing too, like, do you know if they're male or female, number one? And this is the same thing with in English. Do you know if they're, señor, señora, señorita, whatever, or if they identify as non-binary, right? You don't know. So I think that's why the trend lately has been, especially in email, because it is a little bit more informal, is people tend to go with first names. But if that's not your org speak, if that's not the voice of your organization, then you may want to have people manually choose that themselves somehow when they're buying a ticket, or so that they can identify themselves as what they want to be called, because that can also get you into a sticky wicket as well. So the other thing, once you have the language, I think the copyright and all of that, I think you have to go into the code for MailChimp to do that. I'd have to look again to change that.
I just sent a few links to the MailChimp help
good.
documents
Good.
for how to translate content, as well as headers and footers
Good.
and autofill. And so some of them you can do automatically, and some of them you can just make custom translation.
Exactly.
Tags. Yep.
Yeah. And the other thing too, Rick, is you want to be sure that the version of Spanish that you're using is the cleanest version, and not necessarily, because every dialect in Spanish uses slightly different words for things. So if you are using a translator, for example, make sure that translator is somebody that speaks sort of high Spanish and neutral Spanish, so that you can, and I know this personally as a pretty proficient Spanish speaker, having been married to a person who's a native Spanish speaker and working in South Florida for a long time, where you have Spanish speakers that are from different countries, it's important to have that sort of most neutral Spanish there. That's a really interesting question, though. Anyone else that wants to unmute with a question? We can end early. I haven't looked at my email. Do I already have emails from all of you in my inbox? It's quite possible. Here, I'm going to put, because this is such a nuanced thing, I'm going to put my email address in the chat. And it is, for those of you who are on the recording, it's just CC, which is CECI, at theformgroup.com. And if anyone has any questions, oh, nope, I don't want to send that just to Joe privately. I want to send it
I have your email.
I know. Let's see. There we go. Please feel free to reach out. A little bit of advice is always free, and I'm happy to. I would rather you reach out to me and I give you a little bit of advice to set you on the right path, because that's going to be easier than trying to kind of double back and redo things later. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free.
Thank you so much, Cece. This has been
Sure.
so helpful. And I think this also, automation is incredibly powerful and important. But the other thing that's really cemented home for me, and I hope it's cemented home for everyone else, is that having a well-organized list with tags and having kind of policies and procedures in place for how people are getting added to your list and how you're segmenting is key for everything that we're doing. And if you send people highly relevant emails, they won't be mad. At NAMP, I heard from Sierra and Brittany that there was somebody talking about how they increased the number of emails they were sending to increase engagement. But the nuanced piece of that was they increased relevant emails. It was all stuff people wanted. So they actually ended up sending more emails, which seems counterintuitive, but they weren't sending those broad emails. It was only going to renewal, welcome, reminders, it's coming up, don't forget, have you done this, et cetera, all about actions they'd already taken, things they were already doing, things you wanted them to do because you knew they were interested. And that's really what got reinforced for me on top of how cool all this automation stuff is. So thank you.
Yep. Sure. Thanks everyone for being here today.
Appreciate you all.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.